Pentagon, now's the time.
Where are we on immigration reform? Is the administration concerned that this is a step backward?
Well, we absolutely have to get this done. Again, this should be a bipartisan issue. This is about strengthening the country, strengthening the economy, moving people from the shadows of society into the mainstream and helping them become productive citizens.
Thousands of protesters came out today to demand immigration reform, but they speak for the voices of millions of people across this country asking for change.
Well, it's absolutely, it's brutal. I'd say it's inhumane. And I'm hugely focused on making sure that dreamers have a chance to get a college education.
Despite being called a mosaic, a melting pot, a kaleidoscope, and even the land of opportunity, debates and protests over immigration are as frequent and controversial as ever. Although the United States is a nation of immigrants, they have not always treated all immigrants equally. Engraved in the Statue of Liberty, the famous poem by Emma Lazarus professed to welcome immigrants. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. But in reality, this process was not an easy one. It was not until 1965, with the passage of the Hart-Keller Immigration Act, that immigration laws were finally reformed to eliminate the race-based quota system put in place in the 1920s. But who was responsible for this reform? Who was the leader of this fight? Emanuel Keller. Due to the leadership of Emanuel Keller, characterized by his unwavering perseverance and persistence, his 40-year battle to reform American immigration policy finally came to fruition with the passage of the Hart-Keller Immigration Act of 1965. Despite the fact that this act was seen as unrevolutionary, he, with the help of others, completely shifted America's demographics for future years to come. Since the founding of the United States, this country has been known as a nation of immigrants. Whether people came for economic opportunities, religious freedom, or just a fresh start, the United States of the 18th and 19th century placed few limitations on immigration. This was later referred to as old immigration, where the majority of immigrants came from Britain, Ireland, and Germany. However, in the 1880s, immigration origins drastically shifted. These so-called new immigrants came from Italy, Eastern Europe, and Russia, many of whom were Catholic, Jewish, or poor. They flocked to America with the hopes of finding refuge and success in the bustling American cities of the Gilded Age. But not all Americans welcomed these newcomers. Nativists saw these waves as threatening the progress and stability of the United States. Nativist John Dos Passos, a 20th century novelist, wrote, "We built up this country and then we allow a lot of the foreigners, the scum of Europe, the offscourings of Polish ghettos to come and run it for us." The first federal policy in response to these fears was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, barring Chinese workers. With the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, many Americans saw their labors no longer necessary and threatening to their labor rights. Not long after, in 1892, the first federal immigration station was opened on Ellis Island to regulate the waves of new immigrants. From 1890 to the early 1900s, about 10 million people immigrated to America. With the outbreak and chaos of World War I, the United States knew it was necessary to put further limits on immigration. Known as the Act of 1917, it required immigrants older than 16 to pass the literacy test. After the war, America returned to isolationism because they did not want war refugees or problems of Europe to bring their troubles to America. However, despite the literacy test, 800,000 immigrants continued to come to America between 1920 and 1921. In 1921, the Emergency Quota Act restricted newcomers from Europe in any given year to a definite quota, which was set at 3% of the people of their nationality which had been living in the U.S. in 1910. This was in response to the fear of immigrant radicals and Jewish groups with the spread of communism, especially after the Red Scare in Russia and the Bolshevik Revolution. Immigration was now limited to 150,000 people per year. The legislation of 1921 was soon replaced by the Immigration Act of 1924. This was a drastic change. The new law would now use the census of 1890 to calculate immigration quotas, rather than the census of 1910. This is important because 1890 was before the wave of new immigrants. The quota system thus put into law the race and origins-based preference for Northern and Western hemispheres. It is at this time when Emanuel Keller enters the scene. Also known as Manny Keller, he was born in Brooklyn, New York on May 6, 1888, and grew up in a middle-class family where he lived a few streets away to find the sounds and the smells of poverty. He studied at Columbia University Law School in New York City, where he began as a lawyer in 1912. Years following, this Democrat was elected into the Senate in the year 1923. He fought against the unjust restriction of immigration due to his Jewish background. He constantly worked to fight against discriminating views and acts that were being passed in Congress. Although his passionate drive and strong-willed mind planned to fix the immigration restrictions, he explained that, "For the first 10 years of my life in Congress, I had been timid. I had been too timid to tell the truth as I saw it." For example, the Act of 1924, also known as the Johnson-Reed Bill, signed by President Coolidge, was the basis for immigration policy. Keller wrote, "Thanks to the ill-considered and improvident Johnson Bill, and so race is set against race, class against class. Fortunately, by the time of the Depression in the United States, he finally stood up for what he believed in and recalled, "I had taken on the color of the climate around me and had driven back all the emotion that rose from the Brooklyn streets so that I could belong unobtrusively to the exclusive club of Congress." His turning point for change was in the late 1930s while working with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He fought for the safety of the Jewish during the Holocaust. Due to the emergency quota system, limited Jewish immigrants could protect themselves from the Nazis, causing them to live in a world of fear. Keller fought for immigration and civil rights policies for 40 years as a senator. Not only was he a strong fighter for the Immigration Act of 1965, but he also worked in Congress to authorize the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and sponsor the Civil Rights Act of 1964. His determination and persistent behavior made a profound effect for today's society in America. Keller was a man of good intentions, trying to fix the corrupt society of the U.S. during the mid-20th century. He argued that change had to happen because the rate of population growth in the United States is slightly below that required to reproduce itself. Not long after, the Immigration Act of 1965, also known as the Hart-Keller Act, was introduced by Emanuel Keller and Philip Hart. Keller, who initially created the bill, was more influential in the bill process because his persuasive skills in Congress worked so that both houses could agree on the reform. The purpose of the act was to reunite families and end the national quota system. This act built on the purpose for America's founding, which was to allow anyone of any culture or race to live their American dream and start a new life. This act also created more education and skills in America that would assist the growing country. Not only did this act reunite families and introduce assistance to our economy, but it created a chain migration, where immigrants continually flowed in waves into America. Due to Keller's leadership role in the Immigration Act of 1965, the racial makeup of the United States completely shifted. Keller essentially changed the majority of the population, 80% white, to a more diverse community where many of the immigrants came from non-white countries such as Asia, Southern and Eastern Europe, and Latin America. Keller was finally defeated in Congress in 1972 and returned to be a lawyer once again in New York. Although he died in Brooklyn on January 15, 1981, he had left an imprint on the soil of America that is still a controversial debate today. President Lyndon B. Johnson was credited with the signing of the bill on October 3, 1965, but it did not take full effect until 1968. Lyndon remarked that he wanted to create a great society where there would be more workers and families reunited. It is evident that the act helped in the workforce and provided economic assistance, especially in today's modern time. But in the 1960s, no one knew the real significance of the act for the upcoming years. Nobody would have imagined that in today's world, they would be treated by Asian or German doctors in a hospital. Although no one knew the consequences of the act, some may credit it to be one of the worst immigration policies in place, while others argue that it positively added more diversity and opportunities to our melting pot society.
This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill. It does not affect the lives of millions. It will not reshape the structure of our daily lives or really add importantly to either our wealth or our power.
By the 1970s, illegal immigration rose to about 1 million people in the United States. Today, that number has reached over 11 million. President Barack Obama is working to deal with the overwhelmingly large amount of illegal immigrants in our society. Recently, his plan of action is to secure the borders even tighter and change the citizenship requirements. Not only would they have to pay taxes, but they need to learn the English language and perform background checks. Together, we can build a fair, effective, and common-sense immigration system that lives up to our heritage as a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. However, this is just one of the many changes the government is undergoing to fix this problem. More importantly, the demographics increasingly rose from Mediterranean Europe, Asia, and Latin America. But negatively, Americans also fear the threat to their culture, language, and jobs. Other results of the act is currently the threat to the English language. The amount of diversity in cultures in one country creates a large language barrier and the biggest difference among the minorities. It is believed that by 2050, less than 50% of the population will be white and America could become an alien nation. The determination of Emanuel Keller to reform the immigration policies and end discriminating views in America has affected the country more than anyone would have imagined. His leadership drastically changed the balance of our society into what is becoming known as a true nation of immigrants.
Not just blacks and whites, but also women and Latinos and Asians and Native Americans and gay Americans and Americans with a disability. They swung open for you and they swung open for me.